think it's time to blow this scene. Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
Estamos de vuelta en Documentos Clasificados y el día de hoy tenemos una sorpresa espectacular. Está ya con nosotros Jaime Carreño, que está en estos momentos a punto de prender su cámara porque no lo vemos. Y bueno, pues para platicarles que está con nosotros el señor Mike Baron. Él es un escritor de cómics profesional, mejor conocido como el creador de las series de Badger y Nexus. Baron comenzó su carrera a mediados de los años 70 y contribuyó justamente para la mayoría de los principales editores de cómics, incluidos Marvel, incluido DC, Dark House, entre muchos otros. Ha trabajado también para otras compañías, pero bueno, el día de hoy vamos a conocer su trabajo, pero antes de presentarlo, mi estimado Jaime Carreño, pues te doy la bienvenida. ¿Cómo estás?
¿Qué tal, Daniel? Buenas noches a todos nuestros seguidores y efectivamente tenemos nuevamente un invitado de lujo, el gran Mike Baron.
No, de super lujo, Jaime, si quieres presentarlo, por favor.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much for your time. We are really appreciate that you're having some time to talk to us about yourself, about your involvement in comics and some of your creations.
Thank you for inviting me, Jaime.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with some of the questions that we prepared for you, Mike. Can you tell us first how you started with your career in comics and how your famous creations, Nexus and the Badger, came along?
Well, I'd always been interested in comics, and I tried to draw for many years. I taught myself. I didn't study it, but I got up to the point where I could draw well enough that people understood what I was drawing. I was working at an insurance company in Madison, Wisconsin, when a newspaper editor, whom I knew, called me up and said, "There's a guy down here trying to sell us his artwork, and he draws just like you," which was a laugh because he drew nothing like me. So I arranged to meet him down at the university. That was Steve Rude. He opened his portfolio, and we decided to work together. He wanted to do comics but couldn't write. I wanted to do comics but I couldn't draw. And we were really in the right place at the right time because Madison was the hometown of Capital City Distribution, the second largest comic book distributor in the world. And we heard that they planned to launch their own line of comics. So I brainstormed Nexus, the first 12 pages. I drew them all out by hand. And I started with the premise that every time the hero showed up, somebody died, because that was dramatic. But I didn't want the hero to be unsympathetic, so I had to create a reason why he had to kill these people and the audience would root for him. So I made him an executioner of mass murderers. And the mass murderers would appear to him in dreams. Night after night, he would relive the horrors of their regimes and the suffering of their victims. And when he woke, he knew what he had to do. He had to eliminate them or the dreams would continue until they drove him mad. Now, there's a whole bunch of backstory here about how his father was a tyrant who blew up his own planet because they refused to obey. And then he sent his ship into a black hole seeking destruction, but they weren't destroyed. They came out near a mysterious world called Ilum. And that's where young Horatio Hellpop grew up with the guidance of two ghost figures, Elf and Beta, who held the secret to his powers, which he didn't understand for years to come. But the truth is that he had been chosen as the conscience of his race by an insane alien, the Merc. And it was the Merc who sought out these mass murderers and sent the dreams to Horatio Hellpop. We didn't reveal this until the 19th issue. So we just started with him growing up. He had a horrible childhood. His mother committed suicide, and his father was about to commit suicide when Nexus realized that his own father was a mass murderer. And because when he came upon his father holding a gun to his head, Nexus killed him first to remove that sin from his soul and take it upon himself. And then he embarked on his career of tracking down mass murderers and exterminating them. I took these 12 pages to the dude, and he drew them. And even then, from the very beginning, and those pages are readily available in multiple reprints, people could see that he was an astonishing artist. And we showed these to the boys at Capital City, and they said, yeah, we're going to do this. Now we need 20 more pages. So we did 3 black and white oversized issues for Capital Comics, and then they decided to go in color. And we did 6 color issues before Capital City realized they didn't really know what they were doing. But the character had caught on by then. It was exciting. People wanted to have it. So we chose to go with First Comics out of Chicago. They had an impressive lineup. They had Warp by Neil Adams, Star Slayer by Mike Grell, and American Flag by Howard Chaykin. And I remember meeting with the editors at the Belvedere Oasis, which was a rest stop straddling the interstate halfway between Chicago and Madison, to hammer out the deal. So we went with First Comics, and they took over with issue number 7 of Nexus. And we were with First Comics for 10 years, and we did well over 70 issues with them before moving to Dark Horse. So I thought, well, we should strike while the iron is hot. So I said, let's get another comic going. And I'd seen Jeffrey Butler's art on a poster down on campus, and I sought him out. I said, Jeff, let's do a comic. And he said, great. And I said, what do you like to draw, Jeff? And he said, I like medieval stuff. I like druids. So I wrote this 12-page story about a cantankerous druid wizard named Ham, who so irritated his neighbors that they hired the Vikings to take him to the edge of the world and drop him off. But they never made it to the edge of the world. They made it to the New World, and they carried him inland as far as they could, and they buried him in what was to become Wisconsin. And we took that in to show to Capital City, and I'll never forget Milton. He was the publisher at the time. He says, oh, people don't want to read about druids. We want a costume crime fighter. And Jeffrey said, well, I don't want these pages to go to waste. They're the best thing I've ever done. I said, fine. We'll integrate them into the story. Then I asked myself, why would anybody put on a costume and fight crime? They'd have to be crazy. And thus the Badger was born. I was reading a book on multiple personalities at the time, The Minds of Billy Milligan by Daniel Keyes. And that was the inspiration for the Badger. And also because of the fact that in Wisconsin, the badger is ubiquitous. It's the state animal. It's the University of Wisconsin team. You walk up and down State Street, you see badger posters, badger liquor, the badger pub, the badger. And that's where the badger came from. And also, because I wanted to have a comic where I could portray the martial arts in a realistic and dynamic manner.
Oh, that's good. Okay, Daniel.
Sí, bueno, Jaime, mira, lo que pasa es que yo tenía pensado una pregunta, pero ahorita con lo que acaba de comentar de esta interesantísima historia que nos comenta, yo quisiera saber, Jaime, él es de los pocos artistas que después de trabajar en compañías tan consagradas como ya sabemos cuáles son todos, logró colocarse en bibliotecas, o sea, en librerías, quiero decir, librerías. Entró a través de estos personajes del que nos habló a librerías. Entonces, yo quiero preguntarle eso, ¿no? No nada más entró ahí, sino que además, mi estimado Jaime, lo que provocó fue conseguir un premio. Entonces, para él, ¿qué significa esta continuidad que le dio a su carrera como escritor de cómics y además entrar a este lugar donde pocos entran?
Daniel is remembering that you were one of the few people who were writing not only for the big companies, but also for the small company like Impact Capital. And then, but through them, through your stories, you were able to be, your books were actually sold in libraries and bookstores. It was the first thing. It was like a phenomenon. How you feel about that? And you even receive an award, if we are not wrong, because of that thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Steve?
Well, I've won 2 Eisners and an Inkpot Award for Nexus. And the fact that Nexus appears in libraries throughout the world is mostly the work of Dark Horse, whom we went with after First Comics, because Dark Horse had a farther reach. And they did deals in a whole bunch of countries, including Spain and France and Brazil, I believe. It's in Portuguese as well. So we're gratified by Nexus's global reach, but it's not as wildly popular as any of the Marvel or DC characters, of course. But it's popular, you know, and we're still doing it. It's probably the longest lasting independent superhero comic that has ever been.
Sure, for sure. Okay, Daniel, let me go for the next question.
Yes.
Okay, Mike, one of the things that I remember very clearly is you were the mind behind The Flash when Wally West took over Barry Allen after the crisis. And one of the things that I noticed there, it was so good, I like it, it was the obvious reason that he has to eat because he's just running. Then he won the lottery and he was even not as fast as Barry. Can you tell us how that came from? It came from you or it came from DC? That idea of making him slower.
Well, that was my idea. I like to. Superheroes are fantasy. We all know that, but the more real you can make them, the better the story. It's better for the reader, the more credible you can make them. So I asked myself, well, this guy is burning enormous amounts of energy to achieve the speeds that he does. He would have to consume enormous amounts of food in order to burn that off. And that's where the eating came from. And I also felt that he was a young man. He was a bit of a rake. So I gave him a personality. He was not a settled family man like Barry Allen. And he was also not above taking a few bucks, you know.
Okay, let me go back with that issue. I personally I love it. I love it. Back when that story, I even remember where I bought that reprint of that comic in Mexico. And I was enjoying your run. And Larry, and Kevin Butch Geese was doing the drawing, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I liked his Flash. But suddenly it was short. It was only 10 issues, 12 issues. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I didn't know what to do with the character. That would never happen to me today. I've changed drastically as a writer. But the fact is, I didn't know what to do next. So I said to my editor, Mike, I'm going to have to give up the book. I don't know what happens next. And that's the essential question in all fiction. What happens next? And I regret doing it. I wish I'd stuck with it. It wouldn't happen to me today. But that's what I did. And that's why I stopped writing it.
Well, Mike, to be honest, I'm really glad that you are honestly. And you say, well, you know, I started with a real good thing and let it roll with somebody else. And that's it. I like it. I really enjoy that much, that run. Okay, Daniel.
Bueno, me pareció interesante lo que le preguntaste, Jaime. A mí también me gustó mucho la serie de Flash con Wally West. Y bueno, es una pregunta que recurrentemente le hemos hecho a algunos otros personajes en este mismo podcast. Yo quisiera preguntarle de Wally West. O sea, ¿qué piensa del Wally West que ahora ve por televisión? Él presupuestaba que pudiera ver a un Wally West pues, de un mundo alternativo. O sea, ¿qué piensa?
Okay. Well, Daniel is asking, Mike, if, I don't know, you're watching some of the series, the Flash series, where you see a different Wally, and then following, I don't know if you're following the comics, where Wally's getting a completely different character, he's been a murder and things like that. So what is your thought about it? with the TV.
I've never seen the show, but I have to say DC compensated me for using my plots.
Ah, really?
Yes. My taste these days runs towards stories that I can believe would actually happen. And while I still enjoy an occasional superhero movie, I haven't seen one in years. I think I saw the first Deadpool, and I saw the first two Guardians of the Galaxy, and those are probably the last superhero movies that I watched. My taste in film runs towards stories that are absolutely credible. The more realistic, the better. Stories that are ripped from life, that you know either happened or you believe could happen.
Okay, well, then, Daniel, you can, since we are talking about movies, maybe the next question, Daniel, related to the series, maybe.
Bueno, con relación a las películas, yo quisiera saber, mi estimado Jaime, también, pues, su opinión, ¿no? No me quiero ir tanto al lado al tema de lo que ya hemos platicado antes. Yo quiero preguntarle ahora a él que si es correcto el tratamiento que se le da en las películas a las obras literarias en cómic. Es decir, en su caso, en las películas pues se hacen adaptaciones. Por ejemplo, el Flash que nosotros vemos en la película, en personalidad es muy distinto al Flash que él conoció. ¿Qué piensa de eso?
Mike, one of the things that Daniel is mentioning about the movies, and I know that you haven't seen too many, is that they make a lot of adaptations within the comic characters and the movies. What is your thought about how sometimes you see some of your characters that you created or work seen adapted in the movies? For example, I don't know, you saw the Justice League, but the personality of the Flash over there is a completely different from what normally we think of Barry Allen.
Well, I haven't seen the movie, but Flash belongs to DC, of course, and it's their property, and they can do whatever they like with it. I have seen some of the Punisher episodes, which used the character microchip that I created, and of course, their microchip was nothing like mine. But again, I can't complain because they paid me for the use of the character. And I have to say that the Punisher, the TV show, is pretty good.
So you like it? It's funny because that was actually one of our questions, is that the microchip or the character in the Punisher series is nothing to do with the character you created for the comics. And I understand the changes, but besides that, you can complain because they pay you, which I understand. But from your point of view, from your character, how you see it and what you saw in the movies or in the series, did you like it or you understand the change? Or it's like, well, it only has the name of my character, but doesn't have anything to do with mine.
I have to say that I've only seen maybe 3 episodes of The Punisher, and I probably should watch more because I did enjoy it. I thought it was a good adaptation. The reason The Punisher works best for me is because he has no superhero powers. He's a character that could conceivably exist in the real world, and that's what I like about him. And I think that the Netflix series is the best presentation of The Punisher on film. Although I think the guy that plays him, John Bernthal, is a little too small. But Bernthal's he's a very good actor, and he's an excellent martial artist. And I admire the way it's choreographed and the way it's done.
Yeah, that you mentioned that he is not that tall. But for me, when I saw him and dressing like the Punisher, it was like, oh my, that guy looks like the guy that a Punisher I would think of. To be honest, it's my own opinion. So, Daniel.
Me too, la mía también. Mi estimado Jaime, bueno, pues yo le preguntaría justamente del personaje de Punisher, ¿no? Ya platicaste algo de ello. Y yo le preguntaría qué piensa de este traslado de los superhéroes ya no a películas en cine, porque ya hablamos un poco de ello, sino ahora a la televisión, a través de las series. ¿No será que las series ya le están ganando el mercado a los mismos cómics? ¿Qué piensa él de eso? Porque ya la venta de cómics entiendo que va a la baja y las series van a la alta. ¿Es correcta mi apreciación?
Yes. Hey, that's a good question. Okay, well, what Daniel is saying, Mike, is it seems that we already chat a little bit about the movies, but now let's talk about the TV series. It seems that the superhero TV series, either Punisher, Daredevil, the Defenders now with the Hellstrom and another
Titans.
series, Stargirl, Supergirl, anyway. It seems like they're becoming very popular. And it seems like the comics are actually, the sales of the comics are declining, but the superhero is still very popular, or even more popular than before. So what do you think? Do you think that the TV series are beating the comics because they got easier to the audience? Or what's your opinion?
Well, one of the reasons the sales in comics are going down is that they've forgotten how to entertain. Speaking of Marvel and DC, they hire writers who have no experience but have an agenda. And people don't buy a comic to be lectured. They buy a comic to be entertained. When you make a movie, you're spending millions and millions of dollars. The stakes are much higher. That movie has to entertain to fill the seats. And so generally, you get a much better script. But that's generally, and it's not entirely the case, because recently the lectures have been creeping into the movies, and those movies aren't doing too well. I'm talking about the Captain Marvel movie, which was a big disappointment. A couple of others, I can't think of the names right now. But these actors and producers and writers forget that their job is to entertain. And that's job number one. That's my number one rule, is entertain. And how do you entertain? Well, you use every trick in the book. You have a fascinating character. You have a seductive narrative voice. You have an unusual situation. You have a great invention. You have a weird science fiction situation like War of the Worlds. The Martians are invading. That's compelling. And you give people a protagonist for whom they can root for. People want to root for the protagonist. Now, occasionally you get a movie where the hero, well, not the hero, but the main character is somebody you despise. But it can still be compelling if it's well done. I'm thinking like a Cormac McCarthy story. Most of his movies, the characters are despicable. I'm thinking specifically of Child of God, which if you have not seen, I don't know whether to recommend it or not, because the title character is so appalling, but it's fascinating. You can't look away because of the art of storytelling. But for the most part, they're called superheroes for a reason, because they're heroes, because they embody ideals and they fight for good. And that's what people want to see. They want to see good triumph and evil punished.
I see. Well, it's funny. Recently, we were talking to another interviews, and that's one of the things we were talking about, that the comics is trying to show you a little bit, entertain you, but try to give you a little bit of a story. You see, things are good and some things are bad, and it's good to understand the difference between good and bad. And at the end, it was focused on the kids, young kids who read comics. Right now, it seems like only older people are reading comics, because kids are entertaining other things. Is that my assumption is correct? Did you share this point of view?
Well, that's part of it. As I said, most of the comics from the big two these days aren't very entertaining. But another big reason is the rise of video games, because the fact is that your average $4 or $5 comic can't compete with a good video game in value for your dollar. It's just a good video game like Grand Theft Auto is simply more entertaining and involving than a comic is. And well, they have a big advantage, because if you're playing a first-person shooter game, you are literally involved in the game. You're a character in the game. And that can be a lot more gripping than most comic books. Most comic books aren't very good. There's a thing called Sturgeon's Law. It was created by the great science fiction writer called Theodore Sturgeon. Mm-hmm. And the law is that 90% of everything is crap.
One question. Daniel, toda vez que está hablando Steve de los videogames, le voy a preguntar si le gustó, si ha jugado el juego de Batman. Now, since you are talking about video games, and I don't know if you play or not.
No, I don't.
Mike, you don't play? Okay, so you cannot tell anything about the Batman video game. It was really good. Anyway,
I've watched friends of mine play video
Yeah.
games. I've looked over their shoulder while they play.
and it was really, really good. And as you mentioned it, Mike, you're feeling you are the superhero because you are there. Even you see the Batman gadgets, and the story is actually really entertaining. To be honest, that's my point of view.
¿Pero
Anyway,
a qué juego te refieres, Jaime, en particular?
hablaba del videojuego de Batman, el de Arkham Asylum.
Okay,
And so,
okay.
yeah, that's I really believe that's a good video game. It was even one of them. I think it was Arkham City. It was called the best superhero video game ever. I tend to agree with that, Mike. But anyway, that's my opinion. But since you don't play those games. But anyway, that's good. Daniel.
Sí, mira, yo quiero aprovechar que estamos con Mike para hacerle esta pregunta, Jaime, que considero que definitivamente no podemos dejar pasar. Hay una crisis en una de las principales compañías de cómics, que es DC Comics. Y la otra compañía, que es Marvel, ya sabemos que hace tiempo fue absorbida por DC, Disney. Mi pregunta es, ¿le conviene esto o sea, es preferible que una compañía como Disney absorba Marvel y le quite la esencia a los personajes? ¿O qué le conviene a DC? ¿Continuar como está con poco o venderse a una compañía como Disney?
Okay. Mike, that's a good question. As you know, right now DC is having a kind of a crisis where many people were laid off, to be honest, really sad. The sales are not going that great. On the other hand, Marvel was absorbed by Disney, but a huge company. And so what is your opinion? Do you think it's good that Disney got Marvel so they start to change the characters a little bit more for the Disney flavor? And if you think DC is good to maybe not having too many titles, but try to get in track again or get in shape again, what's your opinion?
Well, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will be a path to your door. And they're not building better mousetraps. Again, I say that the comics are losing readers for many reasons. The rise of video game, the fact that they're not very entertaining, and also the collapse of the distribution system. The dedicated comic shop worked for about 30 years here in this country. But now it's failing for a great number of reasons, not the least of which is this COVID pandemic, where people are afraid to go out. They're afraid to go to their local comic book store. So for those of you who are listening, please support your local comic book store. And there are new venues of entertainment all the time, like new streaming services. As for Disney taking over Marvel, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, we all grew up on Disney. We all love a lot of their material, but I look at the decisions that they're making now, and they don't seem to be guided by a desire to entertain or reach the widest possible audience. Again, they seem to be trying to moralize, to tell people, you know, I'm split about this because that's what superheroes have always done, but I think they're laying it on a little heavy. And I guess it brings me back to the number one rule, which is it's their job to entertain. And I think they've lost sight of that. Entertainment is job one. And that's the better mousetrap.
Now, what about DC?
You know, the truth is I hardly read any comics anymore. Mm-hmm. I only read comics that my friends send me or press upon me. The latest comic I read was Bigfoot Bill by Doug Tenopel, which is it's a huge book. I mean, it's really, and it's very entertaining. Doug is a wonderful storyteller and a great illustrator. I would read a superhero comic if a friend of mine pressed it on me and said, here, you got to read this. But I haven't read any in years. It doesn't affect my writing. I know what I want to do, and I'm working on Nexus. In fact, I recently published this Nexus novel, and I just spoke to Steve Rude today, and we're planning more Nexus. And we know what we want to do with the character, and it has nothing to do with anything else that's going on in the world of comics, because we've always had a singular vision, and we know what we want to do.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Well, we're almost finished. Mike, thank you very much for your time. And if you have any kind of a social media or work that you're working on besides the novel, please take the time to tell your fans to follow up on you on any webpage or Twitter you may have, or tell us what you're selling, right? What's your next novel, or what you're working on?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron. And I'm on Facebook at Mike Baron Author. I have a Mike Baron Author page. I have my own webpage. It's bloodyredbaron.com. I'm working on a second Nexus novel. I'm about to release a Badger novel, and I'll send you some material on that via email. And I just turned in my 8th Josh Pratt novel. I don't know if people know this, but about 12 years ago, I started writing novels. And my most popular character is a motorcycle, a reformed motorcycle hoodlum. And the first book is called Biker. And they're all in the Biker series. And I just turned in the 8th Biker. But I also started writing Florida Man. Now I'm writing my 3rd Florida Man novel. And we're about to release a Florida Man graphic novel. And this is a humor book.
Yeah, man, Mike Baron.
In fact, it's the funniest comic ever written. And you can find it on Indiegogo, Florida Man graphic novel on Indiegogo. And just go take a look. Look at the trailer. You'll laugh. I guarantee you will laugh at the trailer. And the book, if you get the book, you will burst out laughing out loud numerous times.
Thank you, Mike.
Oye,
okay.
Antes de irnos, Jaime, antes de despedir el programa, yo quisiera preguntarle a Mike. Hemos tenido aquí panelistas que se ponen alguna playera porque significan algo para ellos. Yo estoy viendo que él trae una playera de Hanna-Barbera. No sé si te lo haya puesto intencionalmente o nada más sea una coincidencia.
Mike, Daniel is wondering what is in your T-shirt, because when we interview some other people, they sometimes wearing their shirt. Okay.
Es muy parecido al logo de Hanna-Barbera, ¿eh?
Okay.
No, it has nothing to do with that. It's just some old friends of mine who had a clothing
okay,
company.
I see. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Bueno, pues
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Este fue nuestro buen amigo Mike Baron. Nosotros queremos agradecerle por haber estado con nosotros. Jaime, pues muchísimas gracias.
Mike, thank you very much for your time. And maybe once you release your new novel and we can read it, we will maybe touch base with you and we can discuss about that. I'm sure your
That'd be
fans will
great.
love it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike. Take care.
Gracias, Mike.
Bye.